Hey gardeners, Amy here with Garden Up. We need to talk about some Firewise landscaping. So this is not a surprise to anyone at this point, but wildfires are becoming more and more common. They're getting more and more hot, and they are destroying more and more homes. And so what I want to talk about today is how to design our landscapes to hopefully protect our homes from that risk and reduce the risk of your house burning if there is a wildfire around your area. So I have created an 8-step pamphlet on how to assess, plan, and plant a Firewise landscape. You'll be able to download it from the link below in the description, but I'm going to just go through that list step by step with some images and try to explain and elaborate a little bit on everything that's in the pamphlet.
So just a quick side note, because I'm looking for B-roll images, things to play while I'm speaking, a lot of the images that I see online are really not great for Firewise. They're not great examples. Like, you're not supposed to have anything right up next to the house, and yet almost all these images still have plantings right up next to the house. So I just wanted to put in a little side note of take all these graphics and images and stuff with a grain of salt. I'm sure we will have better images to work with once more people start landscaping this way, but for the time being, these are kind of just the images that are available.
So planning a Firewise garden, you can have a Firewise garden that's absolutely gorgeous, but it's a bit of a mind twist from what we're used to. What you see behind me, where I have vegetation, plants right up next to the house, and the highest stuff is in the back, that is the opposite of what you need to do in a Firewise situation. Basically, in a Firewise landscape, you have nothing flammable next to the house, and then you have zones coming away from your house that are increasing in vegetation and height and whatnot. But next to the house, there's nothing. That tree right there, that weeping cherry tree, would do in my house if I was in a fire situation. Like if I was out in a rural community and the area around me burned, that tree would be the thing that ends my home. So all of that would have to change. So this isn't as much of a concern for me because I'm in the urban part of the city. There's not likely going to be a wildfire that gets this far in. But I do have a lot of clients that are out in rural communities, and I have a lot of family that are in rural and forest communities. And so this is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. It's one that's becoming more and more important. And so I have taken some time to learn a little bit more about Firewise landscaping, and I'm going to add it to my scope of services and then share everything I've learned with you. So step 1 is to evaluate your property and assess the fire risk. Like I said before, I live in the city. My risk of the fire is not very high. However, 5 to 10 minutes in 3 directions of me, we have rural communities surrounded by natural woodlands. So it's not that far away. While you're assessing your property, create a site map. The easiest way to do this is to just take a Google Earth view of your property, print it out, and trace the outline, trace where your buildings are. It doesn't really need to be to scale. Or just if you're a home gardener who's doing this, scale helps, but it's not a vital part of this unless you're actually a designer doing this professionally. You're going to need that later for the design part. Step 2 is understanding fire behavior. And what this means is if you live on a hill, fire is going to come uphill. So if your house is up at the top, fire is going to climb to you. You're going to want to adjust the zones based on that knowledge or create fire break. Figure out the direction that wind usually flies over your home, because that's also going to affect how fire would travel if you have a fire nearby. And the other really important part of this is there are certain plants that are more likely to burn than others. Plants that with low water content inside of their leaves or their wood, like junipers and other evergreens like that, coniferous evergreens, they go up fast. They also have a high resin content. Resin is highly flammable. So you'll want to do some research on what plants are more likely to become fire fuel and which ones are likely to suppress fire or at least not catch fire quite as fast. Next, you're going to start to identify the zones that are around your property. Firewise landscaping typically divides your property into zones based on topography, where the buildings are, and the other factors that we've already mentioned. So you'll want to start to sketch that out on your site map. Personally, when I do a design like this, I'll take my site map, the outline that I drew, and I will make several copies of it. That way I can try different things and not have to redraw it from scratch each time. Step 3 is designing your landscape. Here's the fun part. So try not to get too hung up on the specifics right here. The distances and the names of each zone do tend to vary based on the reference you're reading and your regional guidelines and all kinds of other factors. So I named them based on what makes sense to me, but each of these zones has different names all over the place. So don't worry about that. But what's important is to understand distances and what should be in each zone. Zone 1, I'm going to call it the immediate zone. This is the zone that's 0 to 5 feet from the house or any structures. You could even go 0 to 10 feet out from any structures. This zone should have nothing but non-combustible materials. Thinking like concrete, gravel, rock mulch, walkways, patios, or non-combustible mulch. Again, rock, gravel, things like that. That is all that should be here. No vegetation whatsoever. Definitely no junipers and arborvitaes right next to your house and up into the eaves. But I wouldn't even put ground covers in this zone if you are at a high fire risk. If you are going to put plants in this zone, you should choose plants with a high moisture content that are, low growing and fire resistant. Removing debris from this area is vital. You will want to regularly remove leaves, pine needles, any debris that's blown in, anything that can burn should be removed from your immediate zone pretty much immediately. Zone 2 is your intermediate zone. This is about 5 to 10, up to 30 feet from the house. Can obviously be wider if you want more of a fire break, but that's the general rule. You'll want to keep this area green and maintained. So a low growing ground cover like grass lawn or clover lawn or thyme or pretty much anything like that is absolutely appropriate here. You can also put in plants, but you'll want to make sure that if you do use plants, they are of the fire resistant variety, high water content, low resin, things like that. Still don't put junipers and arborvitaes in this part of your yard. Creating fuel breaks, like by using hardscape elements like driveways, paths, and patios as fuel breaks, will help to slow a fire if it does start to creep into this part of your yard. Spacing out plants also helps. So by increasing the spacing between the plants that are in your yard or the groups of plants that are in your yard can help to reduce the spread because the fire can't jump as easily from one plant to the next to the next. So if you do plant trees in this part, make sure to plant them far away from your house and space them out so that when the trees are full grown, there's still space between the canopies. So this tree's canopy still has a good, 5, 10, 15 feet space between the next canopy. So that is planning for 10 to 20 or 30 years down the road when those trees become full grown. You have to think that far ahead when you're talking Firewise. Zone 3 has lots of names. The extended zone is what I'm using here. It is from about 30 to 100 feet from the house, or even farther. Here is where you can still let the forest be the forest, but you're going to manage the vegetation. You're going to remove the debris that builds up on the forest floor. So if you physically remove it, there's going to be less stuff for a fire to spread on. You'll also want to thin the trees in this area and limb them up. That way it's less likely if a fire is on the ground for it to get into those lowest branches if the lowest branches are higher up in the air. If you do have grass in this area, keep it mowed so that it doesn't get really tall. Because here's the thing, a burning plant can have flames that are 3 times higher than the plant is. So you want to bear that in mind. If you have a tall grass, say your grass is a foot high, the flames would be 3 feet higher than that. That can get pretty intense. And it can climb a tree pretty quick. Step 4 is you'll want to select fire-resistant plants. So you'll research your plants and choose plants with high water content and low resin content. That way they're less likely to catch fire in the first place. And again, avoid plants that are extra flammable because they have high resin or high oil in their wood or leaves. Step 5 is to prepare the soil. So if you want to use amendments like compost or other organic matter to enhance your soil health, now is the time to do it. Go ahead and plant. And then use mulch, because mulch holds water content down in the soil. It cools the soil. It helps the plants grow and bigger and healthier. Try to use non-combustible mulches when possible, especially near the house. Do not use bark or wood chips up next to the house in your zone 1 area. You can use bark and wood chips farther out, but just don't put it right next to the house. Step 6 is planting. Now is when you're actually going to put your plants in the ground. Follow your plan, use fire-resistant plants, and then water it regularly so that you get well-established and healthy plants, because healthy plants are less likely to become fire hazards. Step 7 is maintain your landscape. Regular maintenance, so like keeping your landscape healthy and free of dead or dying vegetation. Use seasonal pruning like pruning trees and shrubs, removing dead branches, dying branches, diseased branches, and of course, fallen leaves that would become dry and fire hazards in the areas next to your house. Inspect regularly. So you'll want to regularly walk your property, remove any fire hazards, keep these areas maintained so that they do not become fire hazards later. And then step 8, some additional things to consider. Fire-resistant construction. Consider using more fire-resistant materials for decks, patios, and fences. And also make sure that your property has clear access for emergency vehicles. Last, one of my favorite fireproofing techniques is to install one of those irrigation lines up on the top of your house. They installed these in Yellowstone National Park, was actually the first place I saw them. But it's literally just a sprinkler that goes up on the gable of your house. And if there's ever a fire in the area, you can turn it on. So if a spark lands on the roof, it's very unlikely to catch the house on fire.
Here's another cool product I want to mention that I just found recently. This was actually designed and made here in Spokane. It had a Kickstarter recently, and it, I think, is almost ready for market. Like, you can pre-order it now. It's called Blaze Barrier, and it looks like a bunch of little packs of dynamite. And what it is quite literally a string of explosives that react when the fire touches them, and they explode, and they send a fire suppressant out in 10 feet in all directions. So it's the idea is that if there's a fire nearby your house, you grab this out of your garage or your storage or whatever, you run a perimeter around your property, and if the fire comes close to your property, these little packets will explode and put out that fire where the fire is. So it's really cool. So I recommend checking this out. If you live in an area where fire is a risk, it would be a cool thing to have on hand if you ever need it. So I will link Blaze Barrier in with the resources down below.
So that's all I've got for you today, guys. Remember to check the link in the description to print out your copy of this pamphlet that I just made. Have any questions? Leave the comments down below. Remember to like the video if you learned something new. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you get more gardening content in your video feed every week. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the garden.